Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse alongside Mr. Martin Popoff. What's
Yes.
happening, my friend?
Morning, sir. Morning, sir. Well, looking forward to doing this show on a cold Toronto morning. It's actually cold where we've got some reprieve. We had a lot of flooding. I put up all
I
those
saw
Facebook
that.
pictures. Yeah, all flooding all over Toronto. It's just a weird situation with this weak river that flows down on the east side, and there's not much elevation as it goes into the Lake Ontario kind of thing. So it's every once in a while. They used to call it a once every 100 years storm, but now that storm seems to be happening once every 5 or 10 years. So
You were like
crazy.
the man on the street with the phone and recorded all that stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
I felt like,
Yeah.
hey, is that Kenny Kessel or is that Martin Popoff out there?
Yeah, well, my son said, "Oh yeah, it was all over the news. It was crazy," and I didn't know about it. I said, "I'm going to go for a walk over there and take a look." So I just walked and went over 3 different bridges and took all those pictures. So
There you go. Yeah, I was watching. I was like, man, that looks crazy. Yeah, we got a good amount of rain here too, over the span of like, I don't know, like 18, 20 hours or so like that, which was good because we needed it because we'd had like 3 weeks straight of just brutal 90 plus degrees, high humidity, and not a lot of rain. So it filled my pool water up another inch, which is great to see. I don't have to put the hose in there, and the grass is liking a little bit. So
yeah, nice.
not too bad. And yeah, the temperatures will cool down a little bit. It's like probably low 80s. I think it's going to be. It was yesterday and the next couple of days. So
Yeah.
that's welcome. Yeah, that's 90 plus every single day with that high humidity that we've had here in New York. Oof, brutal. No good. No good.
Well, right
So
now, right now, the news this morning was BC has just been baking in massive, massive, massive heat for a long time. Not a lot of rain, and now today they say the wildfires have kicked off. So
oh boy. Yeah, you
I
hate
think
to
we're
hear
getting a
that.
lot of smoke coming up. Yeah,
Yeah, you hate to see that. That's just
yeah,
that's unfortunate, but that's what happens. You get all these dry, hot temperatures, right? And no rain
yeah,
in sight. It's not good.
yeah,
Not good. Well, hopefully they get some kind of relief up there. That would be kind of nice.
yeah.
So today, folks, we're going to kind of put the finishing touches on our what's been like a long series on the new wave of British heavy metal. We've done lots of different themed shows centering around this whole movement of music. Remember, it's not a style of music, it's more a movement. A lot of different bands participating in this in that short span of 1979 to 83 or 84. We've talked about a lot of the big ones. We've talked a little bit about some of the not so big ones. That's kind of what we're going to focus on today. We want to give some love to the lesser bands that are not Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, Saxon, Motorhead, the ones we've been talking a lot about. And again, we know a lot of people don't agree with us that Motorhead belong in this discussion. We will continue to argue that we believe they do, but that's okay. We're throwing that out the window today. Forget about those four bands. What Martin and I have done is we've taken a look at our favorite 20 new wave of British heavy metal albums that do not include those four. I'm also for the purposes of today, I'm not including Gillan in mine. I think Martin's going to include Gillan in his. I've decided not to do that. I'm just going to pick mainly the bands that we haven't really focused on, although we did talk about a couple of them last week. So we've ranked our 20 favorites. So that's what we'll
Yeah,
do.
I want to attack that issue again because I don't know why it drives me crazy this
It
Gillen
does the same for
Motorhead
me. I
thing,
know. I
right?
get it.
I know. But I wanted to make another point that I don't think I've made. When I go through the laundry list of why those bands should be in and not. Um, it's probably logically you're not supposed to do this, but to add a North American perspective, right? Um, I look at some of these bands like Gillan and Motorhead, and there's a little bit of the dynamic of how much did they get over here? How much did they stay in England versus coming over here? What kind of record labels were they on over here? Did the albums even come out over here? Did they come out of order? Did they come out slightly compromised, right? And we know what happened. The White Snake story is a weird story. The Gillan story, the Motorhead story. So I think that's kind of important, or it's part of the subconscious of why a North American also, another reason a North American would call those bands new wave of British heavy metal bands because we generally think of them just hanging out in the bars in London, and they're not on massive North American tours all the time. They're not over here. There's not pictures of them, being taken over here. It's a rare event. They just feel like British bands that are just just in London all the time and just going up and down the country sort of thing. We don't think of them as being in Europe all the time. We think of them as being in England, you know, or Britain at large, right? Kind of thing. So
Yeah, because
that's the
we've
other
gotten a
reason.
lot of that, like from people who are like, well, you didn't grow up here during it, you guys don't know. It's like, well, no, we didn't, right? But
Yeah.
we're looking at it from a, like you said, a North American perspective. And to us, all those bands popped up at the same time, regardless of the fact that Lemmy was in Hawkwind and Motorhead put that first album a couple of years before, regardless of the fact that Ian Gillan was in Deep Purple and had the Ian Gillan band and whatnot. These were all brand new bands that came up right around that same time. You know, on the same token, we get a lot of people who insist that Judas Priest should be a part of this. And there's just no way you can do that, because if you're going to throw Judas Priest into this, you might as well throw Black Sabbath into it as well. You might as well throw Deep Purple into it as well, right? Even though they were kind of not in existence at the time, because Priest formed in the late 60s. They had how many albums released before 1979? A good handful of them. So there's a big difference between Motorhead and Priest as far as I'm concerned. And Priest were touring all over the place. They were here, they were everywhere. So, I mean, you make a good point about the fact that all these bands we're talking about were kind of doing their thing right there in the London scene. And we were only just hearing about them and maybe seeing some stuff in the import bins, maybe reading about them in magazines. That was it. To us, this was like this mythical thing that was happening over there.
Yeah.
So,
one more thing I want to bring up. Shout out to K-Man Khalil Donaghy. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, but he's a guy on Facebook commenting all the time. I read yesterday on Facebook, he put in a fairly long, I wouldn't call it a review of the new Deep Purple album, right? And but he's a really smart, wise music swami, as I say. Like he really has interesting views. And his view of this album, I love the way he sort of phrased things and grappled with how you describe Deep Purple these days. And that's what came out of it for me. I mean, all the Steve Morse albums and now the Simon McBride album, it's hard to talk about and describe what sort of band that is now. They've got such a strange, interesting sound in terms of the production and how heavy it is. You could do a whole show on his Deep Purple heavy metal band, right? It's just really weird. So yeah, he had some neat things to say on Facebook about this new album. And like I say, I wrote him back and said, this was really cool. It reminds me of how impossible it is to put into words what Deep Purple sounds like these days. It's just a really difficult conversation, right?
yeah. And maybe that's a conversation for another
Yeah,
day.
I know. I don't want to go into a review of the Deep Purple.
Yeah, my copy of the
yeah.
new one should be in here tomorrow.
Yeah.
And like I said, I've heard the 3 songs like everybody else has, and I really like what I've heard so far. But yeah, like, does it really sound like 1971, 72 Deep Purple? Does it sound more like the Morse era Deep Purple? Does it sound like 84 Deep Purple? And what is that, right? Is it hard rock? Is it prog? Is it
Well, literally, you could, you and I could have this conversation, this exact conversation, and leave Equals One completely out of it, because everything I just said applies to the whole Steve Morse era as well. It's just like, I don't, coming up with adjectives and ways to go through these songs and differentiate them and say how heavy they are seems to be a really difficult thing. I think one thing I remember he said was really interesting. He was talking about the guitar sound, and he said it had a genteel Steve Morse sound, and the use of that word genteel is kind of interesting, right? Because there's a lot of genteel stuff about it. And he talked about Ian, sounds like Ian's having fun and he's pleased with himself and his wordplay and all this kind of thing. So yeah, it's so funny, but that was what felt. I might even do a whole podcast episode on this whole idea, like bands that are hard to talk about,
Yeah, they are. Yeah. They don't really fit in any kind of bucket, right? You could say that about Deep Purple for the last 45 years.
Yeah.
If not longer than that.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, sorry to go off on a tangent. Yeah. Okay. The idea here was to, of course, wrap this up. We had that weird little episode where we were going the top 3 of every year, and that kind of mixed things together. We had the top, we had the big 4, and we thought these other bands need some love. So we went top 20 of the bands who are not in the big 4. And my very first one in this batch is Samson Before the Storm. I've always loved this album. This is another thing. My next podcast episode of History in 5 Songs might be something to do with personality and songwriting and what bands should have been bigger from the new wave of British heavy metal. Because I got on thinking about this album in particular. This is really commercial. It's beautifully recorded, produced and engineered by Joe Julian. I don't know who that is. But so this is after Bruce leaves the band, the very first album, and it is commercial. It's a little southerny sounding. It's a little melodic here and there. It's a little earthy and 70s sounding. You know, it's got Nicky Moore on vocals, you know, pretty overweight dude, and that kind of hurt the band, I think. But this is a really utilitarian, good time, rocking, professional sounding Samson album. So that is my number 20. My number 19 is Tigers of Pantan Crazy Nights. We talked about this a little bit last time or the time before, but this is just a good heavy album produced and engineered by Dennis McKay, who was involved with Priest, right? You don't hear that name very often. And it's a weird production. People have really debated this. The guitars are molten, savage-like levels, strange drum sound, very, very techie, sort of awkward drum sound. But the songs are good, and the songs are simpler than on Spellbound. My copy here, my UK copy, has the 12-inch extra single in it as well. But yeah, good album. Debated, you know, a lot of people debate that album, thought they were running out of steam, and then after that they had sort of the rethink. I did include Gillan in mine, so my number 18 is Glory Road. You know, I have too much Gillan. I should have left Gillan out as well, because you know we could turn this whole channel into the Gillan channel. Right? I know. It's funny. I know, and we just love this band, right? And I still may do that book one day of some sort on these guys, but yeah, and this one's an up and down album. This is a peaks and valleys album to me, and the peaks are so high that it makes this list. The peaks would be things like Unchain Your Brain, Sleeping on the Job. What else? On the Rocks for an Epic. Running Whiteface, City Boy is a good fast one. So yeah, Glory Road next. And then I've got Raven Wiped Out at number 17. You know, the first Raven was a blast. The second Raven was a little more serious and a little more anchored and a tiny bit more bottom end, but not a lot of bottom end. It wasn't that much better recorded. You know, John Gallagher, he's still kind of a yelpy, frantic high vocals. I think the vocals kind of drove people, because he breaks into this falsetto often. But this is considered, you know, widely considered an influential speed metal album a little as well. So they were a little heavier here, double bass, you know, heavier than most of the new wave British heavy metal bands, a little more wall of sound, a lot of personality. And, you know, as always, I guess I was into this more when they slowed down and got a good chug and a good groove going. But yeah, it's a little fast and frantic, not a great album cover either. And then my number 16 is Tank, Power the Hunter. It's going to be more Tank on this list. I just love this band to death. The Thinking Man's Motorhead, Algie Ward. Great picture on the back of Algie there. This is just, you know, great songwriting, but it's still gritty. There's a sense of humor. There's a literary bent, I think, to these guys as well. He's got a great turn of phrase. Love his vocal fry vocals, amazing vocals on here as well. Some Came Running, Use Leather Hanging Loose is really good on here. They've got the cover of the Osmonds Crazy Horses, which sounds great as well. Power of the Hunter is really good too. Couple fast ones I'm not as crazy about, but yeah, and the Brabs brothers, guitars and drums, Algie Ward, the great Algie Ward from the Saints and the Damned on that. So that is my top, my first 5.
All right, so my number 20 is going to be the Witchfind debut, which is Give 'Em Hell from 1980. It's crazy to think about how early this one came, right? This is one of those early ones. You know, as we did a ranking of the albums of Witchfind a couple of years back, and this is a really interesting album that you got that real garish cover. Yeah. And then the music is not quite as evil looking or evil sounding as the cover looks, but I think it's still a pretty solid record of a band just trying to find their way. But there's some good riffs on here. It's not overly heavy, but I think it's a really enjoyable album. It doesn't have the best vocals in the world, but I mean, you know, Divine Victim, Ready to Roll, getting heavy, all good stuff. Title track is really good. I think it's a very, very solid album. I put it as my number one at the time of the Witchfind catalog. I think you had their second album as your favorite in the catalog, but both really, really strong. So that's my number 20. My number 19 is going to be Samson Shock Tactics. Do they have better albums in their catalog? Perhaps. But I think this is a fantastic vocal performance from Bruce Dickinson. And this is the album right before he leaves to go and join Iron Maiden. And I think he sounds primed and ready to make that transition on this album. I would say anybody who's a Maiden fan who's never heard this album and wants to hear some Dickinson before he joins Maiden, some terrific stuff on here. Like I said, it's not all balls out heavy. There's some kind of like bluesy rock on here, but it's still really, really good. Communion's great. Earth Mother's a really good song. Go to Hell is good. Once Bitten, also pretty strong. Another good one. That is my number 19. My number 18, I'm going to go with Venom's Welcome to Hell, which of course is their debut album, and this came out in 1981. It's funny how I always thought the Venom was a little earlier, but they showed up right smack in the middle of this thing here. This is God, how do you describe this album? It's grimy, it's dirty, it's not well played, it's sloppy, but man, there's just, the title track is awesome. Schizoid is awesome. You got Witching Hour, which is one of their, most well-known songs. In League with Satan. Oh, just great, great stuff on here. But again, this is like everything that a lot of these other bands were doing, trying to be more refined, lots of, melodic, twisty twin guitars and things like that. There's none of that going on here. And this obviously, Venom, maybe a little bit with Motorhead as well, kind of like where extreme metal got its kind of start, and other bands built on it from here. So yeah, Welcome to Hell, number 18. Number 17, I'm going to go with Demon, The Unexpected Guest.
Okay.
One of those bands that is part of this whole movement, but if you really listen to them, they don't really sound like anybody else. They're very much melodic rock AOR with doses of prog. They use lots of keyboards, a lot of great choruses and melodies and things like that. Really good production on this album. I'd say arguably the songwriting's a little bit better on here than compared to the debut, but they're both really, really strong. Sign of the Madman's great. Don't Break the Circle is great. Total Possession. A lot of really good songs on here. Very classy, classy album. That's my number 17. And my number 16 is Raven All for One,
okay,
which came out in 1983. So this is right at the end of this whole period. Yep. Raven, for me, they were never one of my favorite bands from this whole movement, but they were one of the more I guess you could say out of the kind of the second wave, not talking about the big bands, probably right up there with anybody else. Yeah, I got that classic cover with the swords. This to me is just meat and potatoes, lunk-headed metal. Right there they are. Look at them, got the hockey mask and everything from Wacko. Mind over metal. There's cliches all over the place, but this is a fun, energetic album. All for One, sledgehammer rock, Take Control, Seek and Destroy, athletic rock, lots of rock songs, Break the Chain. I mean, it's a lot of fun. And for me, it's always been my favorite Raven album. And then, of course, you got the live album, which comes out, which has got like great songs from this and other ones. So yeah, that's my numbers 20 through 16.
Nice. Yeah, I don't have any Witchfind in mind. I mean, the second album I think has their two best songs ever, Wake Up Screaming and Stage Fright, right? And then the next album is I think the next album's 83, and that probably would be my favorite. And I could have put that in here because I think they've got an 83, and then Lords of Sin is maybe 84.
A little bit after that.
But yeah, we're closing it off at 83 here. Okay, so I've got my next one, 15. This is a controversial one. Because again, you could say, is Fastway a new wave of British heavy metal band? It's got a drummer from Humble Pie in it. It's got a Motorhead guy in it. Apparently that's a no-no. And it's got Dave King, a young dude. But again, this, not that there is a new wave of British heavy metal sound, but this is pretty commercial and American sounding. And it just felt like, it came out on Columbia. I saw them live on this tour with Saxon and Iron Maiden. It was a hit in America. This is just a very American based centric, especially if you're from North America. This feels like this doesn't feel like a band that was just hanging around in bars in London the whole time.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I love it. It's commercial. It's got this really cool Eddie Kramer production sound, kind of like gritty and boomy, but still clean enough. Some big hits on here. Easy Living was a hit on here. Say What You Will was a hit, but heavy ones like We Become One and Heft, and yeah, just a good, well-paced, different kind of commercial album. And then funny, you can almost put this one up against it in an album war, but my number 14 is Wasted Vices. So we've got Pete Way, not in Fast Way, and moving over to Wasted. And I think this is also just like the Fast Way. It feels a little bit more like a generalized rock and roll, 70s based, almost American sounding, just really cool, solid, slinky rock and roll. Good, still good heavy album. Finn singing, amazing band shot. But yeah, I get a lot of value out of this and the next Wasted album and the EPs and all that stuff. Love this band. Even the Save Your Prayers I like as kind of like a dark horse hair metal.
How great and underrated are those two debuts that you just showed? I mean,
Exactly.
really,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the two that don't get talked about often enough as being great debuts that they are in the '80s. I mean, we
Yeah.
talk all about the great debuts in the '70s, but I think those are two mandatory albums from this time period.
And yeah, in my heart of hearts, I believe Gillan and Motorhead part of the new wave of British heavy metal, but I can almost put Wasted Vices and Fast Way out of it in a certain way. So yeah, next is Witchfinder General Death Penalty. Show that real fast. There you go. So the debut from Witchfinder General. This is a really doomy but still loose sort of album. The funny thing about this album I didn't mention last time. Okay, produced by Pete Hinton, who was involved with Saxon as well, right? The funny thing about this album, it sounds like one of those, when you get a 45 RPM 12-inch and with one song on it, right? And the grooves are really far apart, and it's got this really kind of throaty low bass on it, like it's really boomy sort of thing. This sounds like that sort of record, right? It's just got this really organic low kind of bass sound on it. It sounds like the guys are in different corners of the room playing. It's not unified sounding, but it's really charming that way. And it's really, as I've said many times, it almost feels like the first Doom album of all time. After Sabbath makes Sabbath, and then basically, what do you call things like Sabbath? You call it Doom, and this is like the first thing that kind of came down that road, right? So next I've got Tank, Filth Hounds of Hades, the debut from Tank, and again, same sort of thing, really punky, raucous, boozy. Got some amazing songs on here, especially Blood, Guts, and Beer. And He Fell in Love with a Stormtrooper. Like when they get just a big Algie Ward bass groove going, on the Roger Glover Teenage Eighth Notes, right? You get just, they create such an amazing wall of sound, and it's just really infectious. And yeah, it's part of the Motorhead family. And I just feel like Angel City's part of the AC/DC family. There's just almost like more substance to this band than Motorhead in a certain way. Just love them to death. And then my number 11 is Gillan Double Trouble, the Gillan album that I was not crazy about when it first came out. It's got they all have kind of a radical production to it, but it's got I'll Rip Your Spine Out is on here. Sunbeam is so heavy on here. Life Goes On is heavy. You got the Epic and Born to Kill at 9:28. The live album is Dead to Me. I couldn't care less. But other than that, yeah, really cool Gillan album. The first with Yannick Gers in the band, right? Coming from White Spirit. And that's it. That is my next 5.
The live album is Dead to Me. I couldn't care less. That's the line of the year right there.
Yeah.
Oh, too funny. All right. So what do we got? Number 15. I'm going to go with Time Tells No Lies from Praying Mantis.
Right.
Again, kind of like Demon, one of those bands that's in this movement, but their music is very, very much more in the melodic rock vein. But really tasty stuff here. I mean, they're still putting out albums to this day. They just released a brand new one recently, which is really, really good. More about the songs. Well, not all that heavy. You got the great artwork by Rodney Matthews. Cheated is great on here. Running for Tomorrow. There's just haunting melodies and just lots of pop hooks on here. But it's just a good, ultimately melodic hard rock record. And they would put out this first album, and then they would kind of break up for a while, get back together. Dennis Stratton would join the band from Iron Maiden, and they've been pretty much fairly prolific ever since then. And with this just really good melodic rock style of theirs. But yeah, classic album here. That's number 15 for me. Next up, I'm going to go with Diamond. Speaking of Roddy Matthews, there we go. Another album called Diamond Head, Borrowed Time, which was a weird thing here because if I remember correctly, Martin, wasn't this the first album that officially got released here in the States for them?
I believe so. I think we got it without the gatefold. Yeah, we got a kind of a bare bones version of it, and yeah, just really a weird disjointed kind of record, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, but there's some good stuff on here. So of course you got Am I Evil's on here, which of course was on Lightning to the Nations. But you got, In the Heat of the Night and To Heaven from Hell, Call Me. And these are definitely, this album is not as heavy as the first album. It's a little more bluesy, a little more in that kind of melodic rock vein, kind of like Praying Mantis and Demon. But then you also have Lightning to the Nations on here. Borrowed Time is a great song. Don't You Ever Leave Me, and Am I Evil. So it's weird how it's like it's got a couple songs from the real first album plus some new stuff, but it's not quite as metal as the first album. But still, I think it's really good, and I think Sean's vocals are just outstanding on here. So that's my number 14. My number 13, late guys to the game here, but still part of it is Tokyo Blade, self-titled. Killer album. I remember when this came out, and the other album that they had, which was in '84, I believe. Just loads and loads of guitars, fast and frantic. It's melodic, but if you like that kind of like that Maiden sound with the twin leads and whatnot, very energetic stuff. Killer City's great. Power Game, Break the Chains, just really, really, it's heaven as hell. On Through the Night's another great song. Just top to bottom, fast and furious, melodic, good heavy metal. And I think one of those bands that probably came a little bit too late to this movement to really make a big name for themselves, which is kind of a shame, but I was all over this when it came out. So Tokyo Blade, let's see, how many more we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 more. All right, so next one we're going to go with Grim Reaper, See You in Hell. We talked a bit about this last week. Both Martin and I agree. When we saw this sitting in the racks in the record stores, we had to buy it. There was no way a young metalhead was not going to see this and go, I haven't heard a lick of it, but I don't care. I'm going to buy it. It just looked evil. And maybe it's not quite as heavy as it's portrayed on the album cover in the back, but just really good, unique vocals from Mr. Grimmett. You got great guitars from Nick Bocourt. Title track is great. Dead on Arrival. I mean, we've talked a bit about this. Just a really good, solid record. Is it the best album in their catalog? I don't know, because their next two have some really great moments close, as well. Yeah. So that's my number 12. And my last one for this round is Demon's Night of the Demon. Classic album cover. I mean, look at that. How evil does that look? Evil as fuck, of course. And then you go and you play it and you're like, wait a second. Something's wrong with this combination. The music doesn't quite live up to the way it looks, but it doesn't matter. I still think it's a really, really good album. It's not all that heavy, but it's got this kind of moody, atmospheric, kind of spooky quality to it. And again, Demon kind of doing this AOR melodic rock, kind of proggy, hard rock type of thing. The title track is great. Father of Time, Decisions, Liar is really good. A lot of really good songs on here. It's very, very memorable. It's just not as heavy as I think everybody wanted it to be. But all these years later, I think a lot of people have come back to this and said it's a great album on its own, regardless of what we wanted it to be back when it was first released.
Nice. Okay. So my next, my number 10, back to Tank again. We've got 3 Tank albums in my list. This is the more epic Tank. A 4-man lineup now at this point. This has got the longer songs on it, a little bit of a war theme. They kind of always had that, but they kind of doubled down on it. Not a great album cover, but it kind of gets the point across. But yeah, I just love that they're a little more epic. They're a little more Iron Maiden-y on here. It feels like a little more ambitious, although the production isn't that great. It's not like a big improvement over the past productions, but it's a little more frantic, a little more riffy. And I just love it. I think Algie is one of the great, sadly, we lost him recently, but he's just one of the great songwriters of this whole era. Troubled kind of guy. Next, I've got Samson, Shock Tactics. I've always loved this album to death. As you said, Pete, this might be Bruce's greatest vocal performance of all time. He's called Bruce, Bruce on the back. He's not Bruce Dickinson here. Produced by Tony Platt, who's done all sorts of things, including AC/DC. But the production doesn't sound like a Tony Platt production. In fact, it's just really gritty new wave of British heavy metal. Enough bass, enough treble, everything you want. Good howling, distorted guitars on here. And speaking of howling, yeah, Bruce is just sending it on all these tracks. He's so good on
air raid siren, right? That began.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And really guttural as well. But the songwriting is so good on here. Bright Lights, Grime Crime, Bloodlust, Earth Mother, and then they've got the cover of Riding with the Angels, best cover I've ever heard of Russ Ballard's Riding with the Angels. So good. Just a really, head held high sort of new wave of British heavy metal album. Next, I've got Quartz Stand Up and Fight. I don't have a physical of this anymore, but basically it's the second Quartz album. We've got Quartz / Deleted. We've got the live album. We've got Against All Odds after this, but this is the album. It's out on MCA. It looks like a Dust album or a Molly Hatchet album. It's just so beautifully recorded. It's really accessible, really professional sounding. Taffy Taylor on vocals, really, really cool. Next, I've got at number 7, I've got the Witchfinder General Friends of Hell album. We'll show that real fast. So this is the second album, and I think they kind of like tie things together a little more. It's a little tighter, produced by Robin George, who we lost recently, right? Robin George was always hanging around the new wave British heavy metal scene, but he was more like a pop guy, right? But yeah, Love on Smack, like weird, creepy sort of titles like that. Last Chance, Friends of Hell, I Lost You on here. And just, yeah, so, only 8 songs on it, 2 long ones. So it's actually, yeah, these songs all sound longer than they are.
Yeah, they're really not. I know.
Yeah. And it's because they have a lot of riffs, and it is just classic Doom. And Love on Smack just sets it up because it's a little faster pace. It's a little different for them. And yeah, amazing vocals on here from Zeeb Parks, the mysterious Zeeb Parks. So yeah, just amazing Doom. This was always such a creepy album. Speaking of creepy, like that's the cool thing about that Borrowed Time album. That album just has this kind of like morose mystique about it, right?
Very haunting. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, it's like, and it just sounds like they're making a bunch of bad life decisions and bad musical decisions all at the same time. It just sounds like they're messed up on drugs or something, right? It's something weird about it. And just having that, the completely elaborate graphics with the gatefold and the Rodney Matthews and all that. It just seems like the graphics are way better than what's on the album in terms of like the quality kind of put together. But there's just something charming and cool about it, right? I've always loved it. It's very cool. And then let's see, Witchfinder. I've got one more, and I don't have a physical anymore. The Savage, Loose and Lethal, with the absolute. We talked about this at length, but incredible riffs, so drunken and crazy, and so Daryl Johnson recording techniques, molten guitars, great vocals, that bleating, BLEATING, that bleating sort of new wave of Swedish heavy metal kind of vocal style that you get on there. A little bit of Joe Elliott, is part of this as well. Little hamey, heavy petting. But it sounds, it's just, there's something Swedish about that album, or at least at the vocal end, and the riffs are just so crazy on it. So that is my 10 through 6.
Heavy Petting. There's another band, right?
yeah. That debut could have been on, although I think, or no, it is 83. I think it's an 83 album.
I think so.
Yeah,
right.
They're really cool too.
Yeah, that's another one. I bought that when it first came out. It's really good stuff.
Yeah.
All right, my number 10, if you could hold back up, Friends of Hell by Witchfinder General.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said. Here you go.
we don't have to wait.
The logo's great. We love the logo.
Yeah,
logo's very cool. Yeah, both album covers are kind of a little racy, right? But we don't really care, but we don't know how the YouTube police will feel about that stuff.
No, it's not racy.
I mean, look, again,
not racy at all.
Both of these albums, to me, it's like yes, they're Doom albums, but this is like a different type of Doom. I always felt that the two Witchfinder General albums are, I think, more influenced by like Heaven and Hell Sabbath as opposed to like Master of Reality Sabbath. But again, it comes at a time where really Doom is not really a thing because you know, we've have Pentagram, but they're like nobody knows who they are, right? They're an underground band at the time. And then, we've got Candlemass and Saint Vitus and all these other Trouble all to come. So really, when you think about it, are these the first Doom albums? If we're not counting Black Sabbath as Doom yet, that's very, very possible. But yeah, and I like both of these fairly equally. They're not separated by much in my list. So that's number 10. Number 9, speaking of Doom, I'm going to go with Pagan Altar, Judgment of the Dead, which was originally called just Pagan Altar, or originally just called Demo. So these guys released the one album back in, what was this, 1982, I believe, and then kind of broke up, then got back together years later and started recording again. They took all their early demo stuff on their first album, re-released it as Judgment of the Dead. This is also very doomy, along with Witchfinder General, but it's got that kind of like epic metal feel to it, kind of like Rainbow Rising, sort of. It's a very different band, really interesting, different vocal style. Kind of like he's got that nasally thing going on, kind of like Mark Shelton from Manila Road, very similar to that, but big riffs, just epic arrangements. Love it to death. Pagan Altar. Number 8, we're going to go with Death Penalty from Witchfinder General. We talked a lot about that. I don't think I need to say too much more about it, but another great album from them. Their first album. Both of those albums are mandatory albums. And again, did those album covers scare people away? I don't know, but still a great, great band. It's part of this whole discussion. That's my number 8. Number 7, I'm going to go with Venom's Black Metal. Gotta have it. Again, kind of like the day. This is a little bit more refined, just a little bit more than the debut, but I think the songs are really coming together here. Teacher's Pet is so good. The title track is great. To Hell and Back, Buried Alive. I mean, Countess Bathory I talked about last week. That could be my favorite Venom song. It's just so good. Don't Burn the Witch. Yeah, great stuff on here. It's the beginning of the extreme metal movement. That's my number 7. And my number 6 is going to be Savage, Loose and Lethal. I do have a copy. It's somewhere buried in my closet. Like you said, the production is just amazing. It's furious. It's crunchy. It's molten. The riffs are killer. The vocals are great. Every song just like kind of hits you in the gut and just gets your fist pumping in the air. Just so, so good. Amazing how high we both have Savage's album on our list. And this is a band that like nobody knows about, nobody talks about. So if you're watching this and you've never listened to Loose and Lethal, I highly recommend you go get a copy of it. It's one of the unsung gems in this entire movement that we're
Metallica loved them and covered them a lot, right?
Yeah, great stuff. Great stuff. So that's my next 5.
Okay.
So
my top 5, I'm going to start with at number 5, Raven, All for One. I just love this album to death. When I got this, I played it into the ground. They completely changed their whole approach to what they were doing. They became this beefy, anchored, mid-paced sort of band with amazing production produced by Double Trouble, Michael Wagner and Udo Dirkschneider. The songs are so utilitarian and absolutely heavy metal. I thought this was going to be a huge hit for them. Crazed Management, in Megaforce in America, right? So anthemic, Sledgehammer Rock, All for One, Mind Over Metal, Take Control. The opening track is just so absolutely well put together. The songwriting is really, really good on here. John's vocals, again, I think are a little bit of an acquired taste. It's kind of in the high range, and like I say, he can kind of go into falsetto a little bit, break the chain. So anthemic on here. Take It Away as well. Athletic Rock, not as great. Hung, Drawn, and Quartered, not as great, but yeah, this is, oddly enough, this is a band that kind of invents speed metal. They move away from speed metal on here. Absolutely. This is more kind of accept feeling, right? A little more balls to the wall. And, and then Metallica comes along and rewrites the whole metal game, right? It becomes about thrash. Speed metal's gone. New wave of British heavy metal's gone. But with kind of like the right moves at the right time, I mean, these guys could have made it big as more of a meat and potatoes Dio type metal band, because this just proves the songwriting that they had was just off the hook. Great album.
I've talked to a lot of people who felt that like Raven and Anvil were both perhaps poised for greatness, and then thrash came with Metallica, and that kind of obliterated what
Exactly.
either band was going to do.
Exactly. Yep. Perfect way of putting it. And then I've got my number 4, Grim Reaper, See You in Hell. So much personality. Again, we talked about Diamond Head. This is the same kind of thing to me. I think just this song, the songwriting on here is so strong, and they could write simply and really kind of linear and face forward, and everything sounded so good. It just sounded like you were it was a train off the rails sort of thing. You're hanging on for dear life to get through these songs, and yet they're not super heavy. They sound like again, like they're like everything's done on 3 beers kind of thing, right? The vocals, the riffs, and it's just so creepy. And I love the way that the artwork and it is creepier than the songs themselves, because there's a lot of melody and personality in Steve Grimmett's voice. And again, it's more chordal than riffy, which is kind of cool about it. So yeah, that always had a lot of that really spooky, scary mystique for me. And then number 3, I've got Gillan, Mr. Universe. What more can we say here on the Gillan channel? Basically, we love this album to death. It's early, it's 1979, but it's just so heavy and cool and Doorsy and Drunk Deep Purple and Punk Deep Purple and all that stuff we love about them. Secret of the Dance, Roller, and the Amazing Mr. Universe as an epic, and Fighting Man as an epic. Dead of Night with that stonking, John McCoy bass on here.
Oh yeah,
just a lot of personality to that record. And then number 2, I've got More Blood and Thunder. I want to keep singing the praises of this album because this has everything. This is absolutely super heavy, and at the same time, it sounds like it's recorded, and it was $100,000 budget. It's on Atlantic. Who did produce this again? Let's see, engineer, mixed down, produced by Kenny Cox Moore and Vic Rush. Yeah, that's right. So it's self-produced, and it sounds so good. Kenny Cox is the leader of the band, the guitarist. He's the guy on the cover, and on the back there he is. And then this Mick Stratton, who we never heard from, again on vocals. Amazing vocal fry. Kind of like a Graham Bonnet figure that doesn't look like he's part of the metal scene, but he's just so committed on here. But the riffs are great on here. Basically, this is a cross between Def Leppard, On Through the Night, and Iron Maiden, Killers kind of thing. It's got that sort of like quality, and wow, these guys should be big based on the songs, the production, the performances, everything on this record. And like I say, it's very heavy, so it's definitely in that sort of Killers range. But just great start to finish. And to reiterate again, I'm not like just a more cultist, because I don't like the first album very much. The Paul Mary O'Day album, which is almost too clean, too polite. Warhead, just not a big fan of the first one. Second one, massive difference. And then my top one of all of these is Angel Witch. This is you talk about Grim Reaper being spooky, and Witchfind, and Demon and Diamond Head. This is spookier than all of them, and more sort of satanic, and great riffs. And if Witchfind isn't the first Doom band, this is the first Doom band, because this is 1980, right? And this is quite doomy. But it's also up tempo. I noticed on the comments on one of our shows, somebody said the vocals wasn't that good or something. I love the vocals on here. I think they're great. And I love how some of these songs are a little commercial. Angel Witch itself, White Witch. But then it's got the super heavy ones, right? Like Confused and all that. So great album cover as well. The classic old painting on bronze. That's pretty cool, on Uriah Heep's label, Bronze. Killer, absolute classic. And like I've said before, for 5 minutes, I felt like there was almost more excitement around Angel Witch than around Iron Maiden, but Iron Maiden just could not be stopped. They were a juggernaut. They were going places, right? And Angel Witch is like, oh, we'll just make a great album, but we're not really going places. So
yeah, but one of those bands, and we kind of touched on this briefly last week, one of the bands from this era that have come back all these years later and released some really good albums. And we had a couple of people who asked if we would ever consider doing a show talking about some of these bands and their latter stage material, because we've got some really good albums from Angel Witch. We've got some Diamond Head has released some good ones. Tigers of Pantang. Satan has been on a roll in recent years.
Yeah.
Demon is still putting out good albums. So, we Praying Mantis as well. So we've got a lot of these bands have come back and have really good late career renaissance. So maybe at some point we'll kind of touch on that a little bit. All right, so my number 5 is Satan, Court in the Act. Talked much about this last week. Okay, despite the name, this is, if you like the first few Iron Maiden albums, very similar type formula, twin guitars, high-pitched vocals, great memorable songs. I mean, Trial by Fire, Blades of Steel, Hunt You Down, The Ritual, all great stuff from this album. And they're more recent albums, and they got a new one coming out soon, are arguably even better than this, as good as this is. So that's my number 5.
My funny Satan trivia story is those guys asked me once to write them a nice letter to get them their work permit so they could come tour here.
Really?
Yeah.
Here's my letter. Change your name. You'll get over here a little bit quicker and easier, right? Yeah, it's a shame that, like, I know I always say it. It's a shame where people will not listen to a band because of the name of the band or a name of an album, just because of that, even though musically it would be right up their alley. And I see people saying that all the time, like when I talk about, Satan or Lucifer, any of these bands. But then you get other people like, I can't believe that people have an issue with stuff like that. It's like, that's impossible. I'm like, no, it's not impossible. You'd be surprised how many people will not touch something like this just because of it. It's like,
and even Poison and Slaughter, right?
Exactly, right? It's like, it's just the name, folks. It's just the name. Number 3, I'm going to go with, number 4 is Spellbound by Tigers of Pantang.
Yeah.
Again, John Sykes, you could make a case for either this or Crazy Nights as being worthy of being up here, or which one should be before the other. I mean, just a classic, just crunchy guitars. Gangland is great. Take It is so good. Hellbound, Blackjack. I mean, just molten guitars, great memorable melodic songs, and they totally look the part. Look at that.
Yeah,
totally got that look. And on the same token, number 3 is going to be Crazy Nights. Wow. Again, nice. Rodney Matthews, boy, he's all over this episode, right? We're showing him left and right. I love the cover, both of them actually. And here again, these great live shots. I remember when I saw this in the store, Martin, in the import section when this first came out. All I had to see was that album cover. Then I turned it around. I saw these great live shots. I'm like, I'm taking this bad boy home, right? And then I brought it home, and I was like, and again, I had no idea who John Sykes was at the time because he wasn't a name yet. But man, Do It Good, Never Satisfied, Running Out of Time, and just Crazy Nights, Lonely Man. It's great stuff on here. Killer up-tempo, melodic, crunchy, hard rock and heavy metal. That's my number 3. Number 2, I'm surprised you didn't have this on your list. Lightning of the Nations.
I know. I'll explain.
Okay. I love this Diamond Head album. I had to kind of, my number 1 and number 2 are not separated by much at all. I think this is just a revolutionary album by a band that should have been massive. But like we talked about with the Borrowed Time thing, I don't know what happened between here and there. And then their third album just kind of went totally off the rails. But man, title track is so good. The Prince, Am I Evil? It's electric. Sweet and Innocent. Helpless is so good. Shoot Out the Lights. Big riffs, great vocals, atmosphere, everything you want. But my number 1 is also Angel Witch.
Nice.
All the reasons you said. I think this is an album that gets better with time, right? You listen to this today and it still sounds fresh, and man, Atlantis is so good. Sorcerers, Gorgon. It's heavy, it's creepy, it's doomy, it's fast, it's accessible, everything. Devil's Tower, Angel of Death. I mean, there's not a bad song on here. So good in the
It's funny you say it still sounds fresh, but it also still sounds 500 years old, which is cool too, right?
Yeah, but it's
I mean like it sounds like it was made in the medieval times. It's just like really kind of historical. It sounds like timeless, right?
From a production standpoint, yeah. I to me, the songs though, and the material still sounds like if that came out today, I'd be like, oh, pretty cool, and that's why I think their most recent albums also have a similar quality. Production techniques are a little bit different, obviously, but there's just something about the way these guys arrange and write their songs. I think it's just.
No, I meant that in a good way. Like it sounds like something that was made, outside of time. It just sounds like Renaissance music almost, right? Like really just dark and medieval kind of thing, right?
I'd make the argument that there's probably no other band that we've talked about in this series that really sounds like Angel Witch.
Yeah.
They're very, very unique here, I think. And there's a few of these bands that are quite unique, but maybe not quite as much as them. Like there's nobody else here. Like there's nobody else we've talked about here that sounds anything like Angel Witch, where you can make an argument that some of these bands have similarities here and there, but not them. They're just kind of like their own thing. Like, you know, we talked a little bit about how there's a doom element in their music, but they don't sound anything like Witchfinder General. Nothing like them.
Yeah.
Nothing like them.
The funny thing about Angel Witch, come to think about it, they sound, you know, they sound like a little bit like they've got a piece of Witchfinder General, but of course they're earlier, so that's to their credit. But the neat thing about Angel Witch is their sort of more anthemic melodic songs sound like the very best new wave of British heavy metal singles by bands who never put albums out. Like there's that kind of coolness to them. There's just sort of this really culty feel to songs like Angel Witch and White Witch sort of thing. But okay, so yeah, I was going to explain. So Diamond Head, something about I can't get out of my head that I'm not crazy about the drumming and the production anymore on that album. And I think some of the songs need some editing and they go on too long. But I actually like even Canterbury. I like all three of them quite a bit, right? And for honorable mentions, just I had a couple here. A few that I have the physicals to show. The new Electric Warriors sampler. I remember getting this. It has so many songs on it, and these bands did not put out albums. You know, it's just cool that it's just all rarities, right? Which is great. So it's much cheaper buying that than getting all the singles, right? At least these days. And another compilation is the Second Metal from Others. Same kind of thing. This is just like full of great sort of rarities. You know, Dark Star is on here. They had an album that was White Spirit is on here. That was a little you know, a little melodic, a little pump rock, I suppose, but very well recorded. But the great thing is Trespass is on here twice, and Trespass is the great unsung band that everybody thinks would have been, you know, incredible had they put out an album. So that's too bad. Zero is on here as well. Horsepower, Red Alert. And then another one I had was Holocaust, the Nightcomers. This came very close. This used to be in my top 5 or 10 easy, but you know, it's a little simple. It's a little punky. It's a little simple tune. And then you know, I had all the Tigers, even the shocking melodic one. I really love this album. I got a lot of time for this album for some reason. And then of course I had Spellbound up there as well. Yep. And remember, I've always called this album literally the center of the new wave of British heavy metal bike wheel. There is no album, no single album that you know, embodies the sound more than this, except maybe Def Leppard on Through the Night. And I had Tigers Wildcat in there.
There you go.
Yeah, this was top 10 for years as well, but I'm just, yeah, it's a little trashy, right? Great live shots as well on the back.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you gotta love that,
live
right?
shots. Yeah, that's my favorite.
Oh yeah,
right there, right? But
a lot of people
Power
argued that we should have had Tigers in our top 4 in place of Motorhead.
Yeah.
A lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, they're like the testament or overkill or exodus of the big four, right?
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Jaguar Power Games as well. Great heavy fast one, you know, speedy, kind of good dirty production on that, kind of you know, a great neat records ethic there. Quartz Against All Odds. Yep. And what else? Gillen Future Shock, Gillen Magic, Tyson Dog, and that Tokyo Blade. Definitely that Tokyo Blade is cool as well. So there's my honorable mentions.
Yeah, I think the only ones I have that have not already been mentioned, I've got Venom at War with Satan. I've got Samson Head On, Girl School Hit and Run and Demolition. I've got the Quartz. I've got the Tank stuff. And I'm glad one of us mentioned Jaguar, because that's a band that does often get asked for and mentioned. So, yeah, there's obviously a lot more. But
and, you know, the funny thing to bring up here is that, you know, people would say that people might say, looking at all these new wave of British heavy metal episodes, that we're kind of mainstream and we're not deep and we don't know what we're talking. I mean, I did all those new wave of British heavy metal books where all those singles, every one of those books is every single album and single reviewed. And I even called it in the subtitle 900 new wave of British heavy metal records reviewed. Right. And I use the word records because I reviewed every album and every single kind of thing, right? So there's a lot of stuff, and we're not bringing it up. And yeah, we're not talking about the rare bands, but the funny thing is, I've often said this just in general, right? The cream rises to the top. I mean, when it comes to albums, there's not a heck of a lot more, period, right? We've gone over most of them. I could have put the Second Fist in here. I could have put the Second Gaskin in here. You've got those other samplers like Rock Snacks and Rock's Caliber and Belfast Rocks and things like that. But, I think at least I would look like a total poser. If I was asked to do a show of my top 50 new wave of British heavy metal singles, because I'd have to go through all that stuff again. I don't have it off the top of my head the way I have all the albums, right? Because I was always an album guy. I through this period, I didn't buy every single, right? I participated a little bit, but to me, to be a band exists or is validated by having a full album. The synergy of all those songs together means a lot to me versus just two songs, and one of them's a cover or one of them's a ballad, right? Which often happened on those new wave of British heavy metal singles. But I guess my point is that it rankles me when I see new wave of British heavy metal snobs and they bring up, oh, it's the greatest new wave of British heavy metal of all album of all time. They bring up like Legend or Saracen or something, right? Where it's like, no, you just wanted to like say you like this obscurity, right? And it's not one of the better new wave British, because as we said, at the theme of this entire show, as I said before, it's like you wouldn't be like drunk off your face to say 7 of the greatest new wave of British heavy metal albums are all by Iron Maiden and Def Leppard, right? So that's the ultimate opposite of being a music snob, right? Oh, and I wanted to bring up, you and I talked about, I honestly, I look at my top 20 or top 15 we did from the big four, and in my heart of hearts, I mean, literally Peace of Mind, Power and the Glory, High and Dry, Killers are the only ones that I would say are competing with the tops of my rarities music snob list here, our smaller bands list, right? So I guess I just want to say in a general sense, all of these we talked about today would fare rather well against the big bands. But again, I want to make the point that anything we didn't bring up, the real obscurities, they're obscure for reasons because they suck. I mean, we brought up all the good stuff here,
We talked about a lot of good stuff here. Yeah. Yeah, I would think for me, if I were to throw everything else back in, I would have, Mr. Universe, Overkill, Killers, Peace of Mind, High and Dry would also be very high up on the list.
Yeah.
Be very high on the list.
Nice.
And probably also Power and the Glory. I would definitely find Saxon would show up a lot more on this list. Probably Denim and Leather as well. So yeah, but that's, when we did this whole exercise a bunch of years ago, it's like our lists were basically all those bands, right? I mean, it was like Maiden, Def Leppard, Saxon, and it just, the whole list was that. So that's why I think pulling them out was actually a lot of fun, because there are a lot of other good bands here that kind of sit just below the surface of all the bigger ones. Lots of good albums as well.
Nice.
All right, Martin, what's going on? Updates with the podcast and Contrarians. You guys had an episode 2 nights ago, right?
Yeah, we had the album cover episode. It was massive album crap cover. I still got to do my next episode of History in 5 Songs, but this is my audio podcast. My last episode was called Peter Gabriel Makes Everyone Better. And then before that was that Genesis conspiracy theory, all their concept album about the worst year in history. MartinPopoff.com for all the books. Yeah, we just knocked off an episode of our Kicked in the Teeth and AC/DC podcast. It was a good hour, all about just the Let There Be Rock album. So you can catch that with myself and John Gaffney on audio. Like I say, it's an audio podcast. And yeah, just books wise, it's the Zeppelin, the Queen. Like I say, I've got all 3 of the new wave of British heavy metal books. I've got the Saxon book, I've got the Motor book. MartinPopoff.com.
Cool. And Martin and I will be back once again this weekend together, along with a crew of other people. We're doing like a panel discussion that's going to be hosted by Jamie Laszlo. about YouTube creators and YouTube creation and why we do this and kind of our motivation and all that sort of thing. So if you want to get a little bit of info behind the scenes on creating stuff like this on a regular basis, you'll get lots of opinions and lots of feedback from our crew that Jamie has put together. So that's coming up at some point over the weekend. So we've got that happening. I do want to make one little comment. This is really interesting considering that this is the last episode in our New Wave of British Heavy Metal series that we've been doing over the last month or so. I went and looked at some analytics on the channel yesterday because you can get all sorts of cool data and whatnot on people who watch and where they're from. And I saw a report on there that shows like the most popular cities of people who are watching the channel during a specific time frame. And you know, Martin, over the last 30 days, the number one city where the views have come from across the channel is from London.
Wow. Very cool. Wow.
I would have never thought that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the North America, well, no, the United States is generally always number one when you look at countries. Canada's number two, and the UK is generally number three. But for last month, the city with the most views across the entire channel, across our programming, was from London, with New York at number two. So,
yeah.
has that been driven by stuff that we've done on this show with the New Wave of British Heavy Metal, or the stuff that I've been doing with Simon and Steven on the UK connection? I don't know, but interesting. So all you UK folks who've been watching, thank you so much for your patronage. We appreciate it. It is showing up in the analytics and the data that you are very loyal viewers. So thank you for that. New Yorkers, get your act together. I want to see you at number one next month.
And it's probably driving all those people crazy that we're talking about all this and we're not from there, right? It's like, you know, and I feel that, I sense that in the comments sometimes, like that you weren't even here, man, kind of thing, right? But
yeah,
but,
Ontario was in the top five. Ontario was in the top five, and believe it or not, I believe number 5 was Sydney, Australia.
Interesting.
Go figure, right?
Cool.
So anyway, so that show I talked about, that's coming up this weekend. We've got Ken Golden, the Professor's Picks, coming up later this afternoon. We've got Jamie Laszlo. Speaking of him, he'll be spearheading the next episode of the review crew. That's coming up tomorrow. And then Grant Arthur and myself will be doing a top 10 ranking the albums of Joni Mitchell. So that's coming up on Sunday. So lots happening here on the channel. Till then, visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button before you leave. We'll see you next Friday here at the Funhouse. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Catch you on the programming coming up over the weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.